Kira Vec had expected screaming. Maybe some dramatic torture chambers with ominous red lighting. What she definitely hadn't expected was the soft hum of medical equipment and the faint scent of Bacta mixed with vanilla air freshener. The Imperial detention facility on Coriolis looked less like a prison and more like the galaxy's most exclusive medical spa. Through the ventilation shaft she'd crawled through for the past hour, Kira could see pristine white corridors lined with transparent observation windows. Inside each room, a figure lay peacefully on what appeared to be a medical bed, surrounded by holographic neural mapping displays that pulsed with gentle blue light. "Well, this is disappointingly civilized," she muttered, adjusting her position in the cramped duct. Her joints protested. 43 years old was getting a bit long in the tooth for infiltration missions, but the Rebel Alliance wasn't exactly drowning in qualified neurotechnicians with Imperial security clearances. Former Imperial security clearances, she corrected herself. Though apparently her old biometric data still worked, which said something depressing about Imperial bureaucracy. She dropped silently into an empty corridor, checking her scanner for life signs. The facility hummed with activity, but it was all automated. Where were the guards? The interrogators? The dramatic cackling of Imperial officers explaining their evil plans to helpless prisoners. The first observation room made her pause. Inside, a Twi'lek male she recognized from Rebel intelligence briefings, Korren Thale, captured 6 months ago during the Sullust raid, sat upright in his medical bed, chatting pleasantly with a medical droid. He looked content. Healthy. His leku weren't even pale with stress. "The treatment has been remarkably effective," he was saying to the droid in perfect, unaccented basic. Gone was the thick Rylothian accent she remembered from intercepted communications. "I find myself genuinely grateful for the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to galactic stability. My previous associations seem so misguided now." Kira's blood chilled. She'd heard rumors, whispers in the deeper levels of Rebel command. Prisoners who didn't return, but also didn't appear in Imperial execution lists. Assets who showed up in Imperial service with no explanation for their career changes. She pulled out her scanner, running a discrete neural analysis through the transparent aluminum. The readings made her stomach drop. Korren's brain patterns showed clear signs of synaptic restructuring, massive alterations to the hippocampus and amygdala, with surgical precision that suggested technology far beyond anything she'd worked on during her Imperial days. They weren't executing captured rebels. They were fixing them. Moving through the facility, each room confirmed her growing horror. Captain Lisa Rentz, the famous Corellian smuggler who'd run Imperial blockades for 3 years, now a cheerful logistics coordinator planning Imperial supply routes. Commander Vale Ostra, who died heroically at the Battle of Scarif according to Rebel records, except he was very much alive, enthusiastically designing TIE fighter improvements while humming what sounded like the Imperial March. The technology was beautiful in its precision. Each subject retained their skills, their expertise, their core personality traits. They were still themselves in every way that mattered, except for the small detail of their fundamental beliefs, loyalties, and moral frameworks being completely rewritten. Neural Identity Restructuring Protocol, she read from a data terminal she'd sliced into. Phase 3 clinical trials, 97% success rate in ideological rehabilitation. Subjects retain full cognitive function and technical expertise while developing genuine emotional attachment to Imperial governance structures. The casual clinical language made it worse somehow. These weren't victims of crude brainwashing or torture. They were success stories. Patient testimonials raved about their improved quality of life, their sense of purpose, their gratitude for being shown the error of their ways. And then she saw him. Room 847. Jace Korren lay on the medical bed, his dark hair now neatly trimmed in Imperial regulation style, his beard shaved into the precise goatee favored by intelligence officers. The laugh lines around his eyes were gone, not because he'd stopped laughing, but because he was laughing at different things now. Kira pressed her face against the observation window, her breath fogging the surface. 3 years. 3 years since the Empire had captured him during the Fonda raid. 3 years she'd mourned him, drunk to his memory, planned elaborate rescue missions that never came together. He looked happy. Genuinely, authentically happy in a way she hadn't seen since before the war started tearing everyone apart. A medical droid entered his room, carrying a data pad. "Good morning, Agent Korren. How are you feeling today?" "Excellent, as always," Jace replied, his voice carrying the crisp accent of Imperial nobility. "I've finished the psychological profiles you requested on the Alderaan survivors. Fascinating case studies in how grief can be manipulated by terrorist organizations. I have several recommendations for preventing their recruitment." The data pad displayed images of Alderaanian refugees, people Jace had once helped evacuate, risks he'd taken to save lives. Now he was clinically analyzing their trauma to help the Empire that had caused it. Kira's hands shook as she accessed the facility's central database. Jace's file made for horrific reading. The procedure had been flawless, a complete ideological restructuring that preserved his analytical mind, his charm, his humor, even his capacity for love, while redirecting all of it toward Imperial service. The worst part was the psychological evaluation notes. Subject demonstrates exceptional satisfaction with current assignment. Shows no signs of cognitive dissonance or psychological distress. Recommends procedure for wider implementation. He was genuinely proud of his work. The man who'd once cried watching Imperial propaganda had become its most enthusiastic creator. But there was something else in his file. A note she'd almost missed, buried in the technical specifications. Pre-procedure neural mapping had been conducted, but there was a secondary backup, an experimental full consciousness archive created during her own time as an Imperial neurotechnician. She'd made an illegal copy of Jace's complete neural pattern 6 months before his capture, part of a research project she'd been conducting into consciousness transfer. It was still there, locked in the facility's quantum storage matrix. The original Jace still existed. Dormant, compressed, but intact. Which raised the question that made her hands shake even harder: if she could restore him, should she? The man in that room was happy, productive, fulfilling what he genuinely believed was his purpose. The man in the archived neural pattern would wake up to discover that everything he believed in had been betrayed, that the woman he'd loved had failed to save him, that his own hands had been used to cause the suffering he'd once fought against. Which version of Jace was real? Which one deserved to exist? Kira stared at the quantum storage interface for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The archived consciousness sat there like a loaded weapon. Point and click to detonate someone's entire sense of self. "This is insane," she whispered to the empty server room. "Even for me, this is insane." But she'd already made her choice, hadn't she? The moment she'd started the download sequence, begun the delicate process of extracting Jace's original neural pattern from the facility's storage matrix. The original Jace, complete with his memories of lazy mornings in their shared apartment, his terrible cooking, his habit of humming off-key while working on rebel intelligence reports. The facility's security systems would detect the breach in approximately 12 minutes. She'd have to work fast. Getting to Jace's room required more creativity than she'd anticipated. The medical droids were predictably scheduled, but the human staff moved with the unpredictable patterns of people who actually enjoyed their jobs. She finally made it during the night shift, when most of the subjects were in their induced sleep cycles. Jace lay peacefully unconscious, his brain patterns regulated by the facility's monitoring systems. Even in sleep, his face carried the serene expression of someone at peace with their choices. Kira connected her portable neural interface to the room's medical systems, bypassing the security protocols with codes that shouldn't have worked but did. Imperial bureaucracy, some things never changed. "Okay, here's the plan," she said to unconscious Jace, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm going to restore your original neural patterns. You're going to wake up as yourself, the real yourself. And then you're going to hate me for what I've done to you." The restoration process was delicate. She couldn't simply overwrite his current consciousness, that would be murder. just as much as the Empire's original procedure had been. Instead, she'd have to merge the two neural patterns, creating a hybrid consciousness that contained both sets of memories. The result would be psychologically devastating. Jace would remember being a loyal Imperial agent and a dedicated rebel simultaneously. He'd remember loving the Empire and hating it with equal intensity. He'd remember believing in the righteousness of both causes, the satisfaction of serving both masters. "This is going to break you," she whispered, initiating the sequence. "And I'm doing it anyway because I'm selfish and I want you back." The process took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of watching Jace's face contort as decades of suppressed memories flooded back, merging with the constructed personality the Empire had built around his core identity. His body convulsed as his brain tried to reconcile two completely incompatible sets of experiences. When his eyes opened, they were different. Not the serene confidence of Agent Korren or the passionate determination of Rebel Jace, but something raw and haunted. "Kira." His voice was barely a whisper. What did you do to me?" "I gave you back your memories," she said, though it sounded hollow even to her. "I remember." He sat up slowly, his hands shaking. "I remember helping design the interrogation protocols that broke Commander Voss. I remember feeling proud of that work. I remember the satisfaction of identifying rebel safe houses. But I also remember why I joined the rebellion. I remember watching Alderaan burn and swearing I'd never serve the Empire." His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "I remember both. I remember being both." "How is that possible?" "Neural restructuring," Kira explained, her clinical training taking over. "The Empire didn't erase your original personality, they built a new one around it. When I restored your archived consciousness, both versions merged." "So which one is real?" Jace asked, and the question carried the weight of existential horror. "Both," she said. "Neither. I don't know." Jace looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "I can feel their satisfaction. Agent Korren's satisfaction at serving the Empire. It's not fake, it's real. I genuinely believed in what I was doing. I was happy. And now? Now I'm neither. I'm both. He looked up at her, and she saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before, complete despair. "I don't know who I am anymore." Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Kira's infiltration had finally been detected, which meant they had minutes before Imperial security arrived. "We need to go," she said, but Jace didn't move. "Why did you do this to me?" he asked. "I was happy. Genuinely happy. I had purpose, satisfaction, a life that made sense. Why did you take that away?" "Because it wasn't real," Kira said, but the words felt like lies. "It was real to me," Jace replied. "My happiness was real. My sense of purpose was real. My memories of serving the Empire, they're still real. You didn't restore me, Kira. You broke me." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Kira grabbed Jace's arm, but he pulled away. "I won't come with you," he said quietly. "I can't. I don't know which side I'm on anymore. I don't know which version of myself to trust." "Then trust me," Kira said desperately. "I do," Jace said, and his smile was heartbreaking. "Both versions of me trust you. Agent Korren trusts you as a fellow Imperial trying to fix a mistake. Rebel Jace trusts you as the woman he loves. But I don't know which trust is real." The footsteps were closer now. Kira had to make a choice, flee and leave Jace to face the consequences of her actions, or stay and face capture herself. "Go," Jace said, reading her hesitation. "One of us should escape. I'll figure out who I am eventually." Kira looked at him one last time, the man she'd loved, the man she'd destroyed, the man she'd saved. All three were true simultaneously. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I know, he replied. Both versions of me forgive you. That's got to count for something. Kira fled through the facility's maintenance tunnels as Imperial security flooded the building. Behind her, she could hear Jace explaining to the guards that he'd been attacked by a rebel infiltrator, his voice carrying the perfect mix of Imperial authority and traumatic confusion. She'd given him back his memories, but in doing so, she'd taken away his certainty. The Empire's version of Jace had been wrong, but he'd been whole. The restored version was authentic, but shattered. As she escaped into the night, Kira wondered if she'd committed an act of love or an act of cruelty. Perhaps, like Jace's dual consciousness, both were true. Perhaps that was the real horror of the Empire's rehabilitation protocol, not that it was evil, but that it worked so well that destroying it became an act of violence against the victims themselves. She'd saved Jace by destroying him, loved him by breaking him, freed him by trapping him in a prison of contradictory memories. The worst part was that she'd do it again. Because authenticity, even painful authenticity, had to be worth more than manufactured happiness. Didn't it?